It begins on a crisp November morning in 1963. The presidential motorcade winds its way through downtown Dallas, Texas. Crowds line the streets, cheering, waving flags. At the center of it all, John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States. Young, charismatic, full of promise. His wife Jackie sits by his side, radiant in her pink suit and pillbox hat. Then, the unthinkable. A crack of gunfire splits the air. The president slumps forward. Jackie scrambles in shock. The car speeds away. In that instant, America changed forever. But before the tragedy, before the mystery, before the endless debates over who pulled the trigger, there was the man himself, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, a hero, a leader, a flawed human being. This is the rise, the fall, and the mystery of JFK. John F. Kennedy was born in 1917 into one of America's most powerful families. The Kennedys were wealthy, ambitious, and determined to leave their mark on history. His father, Joseph Kennedy Sr., was a ruthless businessman and politician who raised his sons to believe that greatness wasn't optional. It was expected. But JFK's early life wasn't easy. He suffered from chronic illnesses, including what would later be diagnosed as Addison's disease. He spent much of his youth in hospitals, fighting fevers and pain that might have broken weaker men. But instead of slowing him down, it forged his resilience. At Harvard, he studied politics and international affairs, graduating just as World War II engulfed the globe. Like so many young men of his generation, Kennedy went off to serve. And it was in the Pacific in 1943 that his story of courage was sealed. Assigned to command a patrol torpedo boat, PT-109, Kennedy and his crew were struck by a Japanese destroyer. The boat was split in two. Many thought the crew would never survive, but Kennedy, despite his injuries, led them to safety, towing an injured man 3 miles through the water, gripping a strap in his teeth. For this act of heroism, he was awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal. More importantly, it cemented the image of JFK as not just another privileged son of wealth, but as a man of grit and bravery. After the war, Kennedy entered politics. First the House of Representatives in 1947, then the Senate in 1953. But it wasn't just his name or his war record that made him stand out. Kennedy had something different, something magnetic. He was young, handsome, and charismatic in a way America had never seen before. He wasn't a dusty old politician. He was modern, stylish, full of energy. When he married Jacqueline Bouvier in 1953, the two became a kind of American royalty. Elegant, photogenic, and beloved by the media, they embodied a new kind of politics. And then, in 1960, John F. Kennedy made history. At just 43 years old, he became the youngest man ever elected president. His campaign slogan, "A time for greatness," captured the imagination of millions. He won not just with policy, but with personality. He was the first true media president, mastering television debates, charming reporters, and projecting hope for a new generation. The Kennedy White House quickly became known as Camelot, a glamorous court of youth, culture, and optimism. America seemed to have stepped into a new era. But behind the glamour, Kennedy faced some of the most dangerous moments of the 20th century. In 1961, only a few months into his presidency, he was tested by the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, an attempt to overthrow Fidel Castro in Cuba. It was a disaster that embarrassed the U.S. on the world stage, but Kennedy learned from it. The true test came in October 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis. American spy planes discovered Soviet nuclear missiles being installed just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. The world teetered on the brink of nuclear war. For 13 days, the planet held its breath. Would the U.S. invade Cuba? Would the Soviets respond with nuclear fire? In those tense days, Kennedy's leadership proved critical. He resisted calls for immediate war, instead ordering a naval blockade and demanding the removal of the missiles. Through back-channel diplomacy and firm resolve, he forced the Soviets to back down. The missiles were withdrawn, and the world stepped back from the edge of annihilation. It was perhaps Kennedy's finest hour. But at home, another battle raged. The fight for civil rights. Kennedy initially moved cautiously, not wanting to alienate Southern Democrats. But as the movement grew, With Martin Luther King Jr. and thousands of others marching for justice, Kennedy began to act. In June 1963, he gave a landmark speech declaring civil rights a moral issue that America could no longer ignore. He also inspired with his vision for the future. In 1961, standing before Congress, he declared that America would send a man to the moon before the decade was out. It was bold, audacious, almost impossible, but it galvanized the nation and pushed the U.S. ahead in the space race. Yet even as he inspired millions, JFK had his secrets. His health problems were far worse than the public knew. Constant back pain, experimental treatments, and a reliance on heavy medication. And there were the affairs. Whispers of Marilyn Monroe and other women swirled, hidden by a loyal press corps that still protected politicians' private lives. JFK's presidency was a mix of triumph and fragility. Publicly strong, privately vulnerable. The fall, Dallas, 1963. On November 22, 1963, Kennedy traveled to Dallas, Texas, as part of a political tour to unite a divided Democratic Party. The sun was shining, the crowds were massive. The motorcade wound its way through Dealey Plaza. Then, at 12:30 p.m., shots rang out. One bullet struck Kennedy in the back, another hit him in the head. The president collapsed into Jackie's lap as the motorcade sped toward Parkland Hospital. At 1 p.m., John F. Kennedy was pronounced dead. He was just 46 years old. The nation was in shock. Television anchors choked back tears. Strangers wept openly in the streets. In that moment, America's innocence seemed to shatter. Within hours, a suspect was arrested, Lee Harvey Oswald, a former Marine who had once defected to the Soviet Union. But before he could stand trial, Oswald himself was shot, live on national television, by nightclub owner Jack Ruby. Millions watched in disbelief. The murder of the president, followed by the murder of his accused assassin, only deepened the sense of conspiracy. The mystery and legacy. The official investigation, the Warren Commission, concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, that the shots came from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, that there was no conspiracy. But from the very beginning, millions of Americans doubted the story. Why did so many witnesses report hearing shots from the grassy knoll? Why did the autopsy reports conflict? Why did Jack Ruby kill Oswald so quickly, silencing him forever? Theories flourished. Some pointed to the CIA, furious at Kennedy over Cuba. Others suspected the mafia, threatened by his brother Robert Kennedy's war on organized crime. Some looked to Cuban exiles or even rogue elements within the government itself. And then there was the so-called Kennedy curse, the tragic pattern of misfortune that seemed to follow the family. JFK's brother Robert assassinated in 1968. His brother Ted nearly destroyed by scandal. His son John Jr. killed in a plane crash in 1999. The Kennedys seemed destined for both greatness and tragedy. But through it all, JFK's image endures. To many, he remains a symbol of hope, youth, and possibility. His words, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country," still echo. His promise of a new frontier, of space exploration, of civil rights and service, still inspires generations. And yet his death remains one of the greatest mysteries in American history. Was it the act of a lone gunman, or the result of a shadowy conspiracy that America may never fully uncover? JFK's life was like a movie, glamorous, dramatic, and cut short by violence. He rose from privilege to power, stared down nuclear war, championed civil rights, and inspired a nation to dream of the moon. And then, in a moment of horror, it was all taken away. John F. Kennedy's legacy is both bright and haunted, a story of what was when and what might have been.